welcome to Podcast.init, the podcast about Python and the people who make it great. When you're ready to launch your next app or want to try a project to hear about on the show, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so take a look at our friends over at Linode. With 200 gigabit private networking, scalable shared block storage, node balancers, and a 40 gigabit public network, all controlled by a brand new API, you've got everything you need to scale. And for those tasks that need fast computation, such as training machine learning models or building your deployment pipeline, they just launched dedicated CPU instances. Go to pythonpodcast.com/linode, that's LINODE, to get a $20 credit today and launch a new server in under a minute. And don't forget to say thanks for their continued support of the show. And don't forget to visit the site at pythonpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the newsletter, and read the show notes. And to help other people find the show, please leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends and coworkers. And to keep the conversation going, go to pythonpodcast.com/chat. To learn and stay up to date with what's happening in artificial intelligence, check out this podcast from our friends over at the Changelog.
Practical AI is a show hosted by Daniel Whitenack and Chris Benson about making artificial intelligence practical, productive, and accessible to everyone. You'll hear from AI influencers and practitioners, and they'll keep you up to date with the latest news and resources so you can cut through all the hype.
As you were at the Thanksgiving table with your friends and family, were you talking about the fear of AI?
Well, I wasn't at the Thanksgiving table because my wife has forbidden me from doing so. It's off limits for me, lest I drive her insane, because I never stop.
New episodes premiere every Monday. Find this show at changelog.com/practicalai or wherever you listen to podcasts.
You listen to this show to learn and stay up to date with the ways that Python is being used, including the latest in machine learning and data analysis. For even more opportunities to meet, listen, and learn from your peers, you don't want to miss out on this year's conference season. We have partnered with O'Reilly Media for the Strata Conference in San Francisco on March 25th and the Artificial Intelligence Conference in New York City on April 15th. In Boston, starting on March 17th, you still have time to grab a ticket to the Enterprise Data World. And from April 30th to May 3rd is the Open Data Science Conference. Go to pythonpodcast.com/conferences to learn more and to take advantage of our partner discounts when you register. Your host as usual is Tobias Macy, and today I'm interviewing Naomi Ceder about her career and contributions in the Python community. So Naomi, could you start by introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Naomi Ceder. Currently, I serve as the chair of the board of directors of the Python Software Foundation. I'm also the leader of a development team that works in Python for Dick Blick Art Materials. And I have a third edition out now of my book, The Quick Python Book.
And do you remember how you first got introduced to Python?
Indeed, I do. This is a story that I'm fond of telling, although it does make me seem really old, which I suppose I am. And that is, it was actually at a Linux Fest in Moscone Center in San Francisco in 2001. I was the tech director at a school, and my assistant and I had been allowed to go out to Linux Fest for the tutorial days. We weren't actually allowed to stay for the whole conference. We had to get back and cover things at school. But that meant, though, that we could attend a day-long tutorial by this guy, Guido van Rossum, who was talking about his language Python. So I actually learned Python from Guido himself the first time back in 2001. That was Python 2.1, I believe.
And it's always great having the opportunity to talk to people who've been using Python for so long into its history, because as a, relative newcomer to the language, I don't have as much of the context of some of the history and evolution of Python and where it came from. So I'm curious what it is about Python in particular that has persuaded you to spend so much of your time and energy on the language and the community as opposed to any of the innumerable other tools or platforms that you could be spending your time with.
Yeah, that's actually something I've wondered about myself. Back in the old days, even in the 90s and whatever, there seemed to be new languages, new technologies coming around quite a bit. And when I started doing Python, I really liked it because of, I was in education, and it was a great teaching language, particularly compared to something like C or something like Java. But I did at the time kind of expect that this would be an interesting thing that then probably another interesting thing would come along and this wouldn't last so long. And I think I would say for the reasons that I stayed with Python so long were kind of a combination. The language continued to grow and develop so that it has stayed relevant for things that I need to do in terms of handling data, presenting things via web interface, just various things. But at the same time, I think it was the attention paid even from the early days to the notion of community, and then the way that that has developed that is really something that is very, very attractive. I know sometimes I'm associated with the quote because, quite frankly, I stole it with his permission from Brett Cannon, but the notion that I came for the language, I stayed for the community, I think resonates with a lot of people, and I know it certainly has always resonated for me.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that sentiment, and I've heard it echoed a number of times, and it still rings true. And I was actually just having a conversation recently with somebody about how it's kind of anomalous the degree of sort of goodwill and community that has developed around this language versus something like Java that has much more of a sort of corporate progenitor where you don't really think about somebody going to a Java conference per se. There might be sub-projects within that language community that have a vibrant ecosystem of people who are dedicating their time to it, but as a language itself, there aren't really that many cases where this many people have rallied around it and built up this entire sort of culture of friendship and openness and collaboration. You know, there are definitely other languages that do have that, but it's not as common as you might think if your first language is Python and your first exposure to a community is the Python community.
Yeah, I think that's quite right. I mean, I know I've heard some positive things from people about like the Go community and stuff like that, but just I think we've basically created kind of a virtuous cycle here. A lot of people now are exposed to the language because of the strength of the community. And one of the first things they then want to do, maybe when they go back to their own communities, is replicate that. So that's a very powerful thing.
And having used Python for so much of your career, I'm wondering what your primary uses of it are in your current day-to-day role.
So partly I lead a team of engineers, so I do a certain amount of code review in Python and not so much production coding, but I also do a lot of, what should I say, kind of utility and glue type programming, extracting reports, being able to move data around, being able to sometimes do a proof of concept on a process, things like that. So I do actually code in Python pretty much every day, even though my primary role is more management and leadership.
As you mentioned, you are the current chair of the board of the PSF and have been for a few years now. So I'm wondering what your primary responsibilities are in that position and some of the activities that you're engaged with, you know, within a given week or month.
So I get asked this a certain amount, and I guess the first thing I always say is, well, it's probably not as glamorous as you imagine. But basically, the role of the chair of the board is to make sure that the board has what it needs to function, to make sure that we have meetings set up and that we have agendas for the meetings, to make sure that we're fulfilling our responsibilities of kind of management and oversight. I also am sort of the direct point of contact for Eva Jaluska, our executive director. So she reports to the board, but you can't have 13 bosses. So in effect, she talks to me a lot. So we spend a fair amount of time consulting on kind of day-to-day operations, things like that. And then there are various questions that come up into our various mailing lists and things like that, where we need to be sure that we have some kind of response from the board. And I see it as kind of my responsibility to lead that and make sure that that happens, whether or not it's my opinion, but still that we actually do come forward with some kind of response as needed.
And there are a lot of times where I've been in conversations where the PSF comes up and there is initially maybe some confusion or misunderstanding about the role of the PSF in relation to the Python language and some of the activities and just overall engagement of what happens in the PSF as it relates to your day-to-day Python developer or people working on various open source projects or different community events.
Yeah, I think that's quite true, actually. And I think the first point is that the PSF does not have anything to do with the decisions taken on the actual design and implementation of Python, the language. That is the core developers. And of course, there's been a lot of attention on that lately as they have worked on and started to implement a new governance model. We support them. And honestly, I expect our connections to grow even closer over time, but we do not have any say-so over yes or no on the walrus operator or something like that. That's not our department. On the other hand, what we do is that we hold the intellectual property of Python and the trademarks for Python and for PyCon and all of those things. And this is actually a pretty important job because we couldn't really have an open source language unless somebody made sure that we had the rights to all of those bits that go out as, say, Python. So that's definitely an important function, but probably we spend more time on just managing and fostering the community. So we give quite a bit of money. I think we're approaching $300,000 this year supporting Python community events around the world. So, as community is an important part of what makes Python Python, that's what we spend, I'd say, the vast majority of our time on is how we can support that, how we can move those things forward, what we can do to help that inclusive global community grow and thrive.
And for somebody who's just using Python to build a web application or manage their servers or do some data analysis, what are some of the ways that they can most effectively engage with the PSF or help support its mission or even just talk to somebody to get a better understanding of what its goals and priorities are?
So to kind of unroll those, I guess, from the back, to find out more about the PSF, you can visit python.org/PSF, and that is kind of our landing page. We also have a mailing list, psf@python.org. That's kind of an inbound address for anything PSF related. So if you have any questions, the board sees that, our staff see that. So that's kind of a starting point in terms of how you can find out a little bit more. In terms of becoming involved, it's kind of a two-pronged thing. For people who have time and inclination to get involved with events and organizing and helping things happen, I always say it's kind of think globally but act locally. That is the best way to get involved is to find the meetup that is in your area, the Python user group, whatever it might be, and help those events grow. If there is no such thing in your area, then please contact us and we'll try to help you figure out maybe how you can start a meetup. One thing that people don't realize is that the PSF does support meetup fees for a Python meetup. Since that's usually a pretty effective way of getting the word out, we don't want people have to pay those fees themselves. So that's one thing we can do to help people get started or even continue. Supporting the PSF directly, like maybe you've heard that, PSF sponsors lots of things in Africa and South America, and I think that's great. I'd like to help out. You can become a supporting member for $99 a year. And stay tuned because I think we're going to be adding some other options to that in the fairly near future. But so you can actually become a member of the PSF that way, which gives you the right to vote in elections, vote for board members and things like that. So that certainly helps. And at a minimum, I always encourage people to just go to python.org/PSF, find the membership thing and just sign up as a basic member. That's free, but it helps us kind of keep in touch with you. It gives us an idea of the level of support we've got. And then, maybe later you can decide to do something more. So those are some of the things that you can do. Certainly, as I say, please feel free to contact us, and board members and various people from the PSF try to make it to conferences as well. When we do, we're there for people to talk to us. So again, don't hesitate to come up and talk to a PSF member or board member if you spot one at a conference.
And how much of the overall success of the Python language and the growth of the community do you think is directly attributable to the PSF and the support that they provide versus the overall ethos of the language and the people who engage with it?
It's really hard to separate those two. I think that to get where we are now, where we are arguably at least one of the top 5 languages in popularity, probably higher than that on most people's scales. I think to get there without the community, and to have the community, I think that's really been the work of the PSF. Without that part, I don't think we would be there. I think you can find lots of examples throughout history of technically good ideas that never quite made it for other reasons. So I think, yes, the language is great, but without the support of the community, and again, I have a hard time distinguishing the community from the PSF. They seem to be sort of two sides of the same thing, but without that, I don't think we would be where we are today, no.
And I think, too, the fact that there is this organizational structure at the core of the Python community that is there to help keep an eye out to the long term versus the day-to-day work that people are doing with their heads down, just trying to get something done. I think that that's definitely valuable as well, particularly as the language and the community grows and matures, and there are always new languages or new platforms to capture people's attention and imagination. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of some of the forward-looking efforts as far as maintaining the longevity and overall viability of the language and its community, particularly as we bring in new generations of developers who are growing up with the language as always having been there versus maybe the original generation that were escaping their original pain with more lower-level languages or languages that didn't necessarily have the ergonomics of Python.
Yeah, I think there are a number of issues going forward that we as a community, the PSF certainly will be trying to be in the lead on some of these things that we need to think about. And I think particularly an issue that we will continue to work on, and that will continue to be an issue, is how to make an open source language and a community based around an open source language really sustainable. And that's in terms of both volunteers managing large community groups, but also in terms of the developers contributing to it. This is a hard problem that, to my knowledge, nobody has really solved yet. But it is, and it will continue to be an issue that in the case of something like Python, you have something that people are using in businesses to make a lot of money that is largely created by people who are giving their time. And that kind of asymmetry we need to have better solutions for that going forward. And no, I don't know what they are, but we need to figure that out.
And so, in addition to the work that you do with the PSF and for your day job and a number of other community activities and efforts that you're involved with, you have also spent time working on writing the second and third editions of the book, the Quick Python book. So I'm wondering if you can start by giving a synopsis of what that book covers and some of the ideas behind who the target audience is.
Yeah, this book is really aimed at people who already know how to code, but who are coming to Python from some other language. So we're not really attempting to teach basic coding concepts. Instead, it's really aimed at being, if you know what you want to do, but you want to know how to do it in Python, then this is the book for you. So as such, it covers most of what I would say are the intermediate to moderately advanced features of the language. We don't spend much time on things like meta classes, we haven't really, it doesn't really go into the depths of async IO or things like that. But instead, somebody who's coming in wanting to get in one place kind of a quick grasp of the language as a whole so that they can go ahead and be productive in it.
And given that you came in working on the second edition, that leads me to assume that there was a first edition. So I'm wondering what the story is there as far as how you got involved, what the overall process was to update the book to the current state, and some of the efforts that were involved as far as either trying to maintain the voice or adapt the voice to something that you're familiar with and comfortable with writing in.
The first edition was done in 1999 for Python 1.52. And the original authors had, after 10 years, it was 2008, 2009, they were looking at updating it because Python 3 was coming in, and Manning, the publishers, felt that would be a good time to do a major update. The original authors were not available or interested in doing that. They had done really a pretty good job. The style that they used sort of compatible with mine, which tends to be reasonably informal and kind of a straightforward, simple style. So, the aim being readability, which is appropriate for a Python book, I guess. The publishers weren't able to find anybody to do that book. And because of other various projects, I had a literary agent who was in touch with them. So that's how I got in touch with Manning. And this was pitched as, honestly, a fairly easy job. All you need to do is go through and make sure that it's compatible with Python 3. Of course, going from Python 1.52 to 1.5 to Python 3 turned out to be a major, major job. So it was probably on the order of doing a fresh book. There were certainly lots of things I left, but going that far, that was written before PEP 8 was really a thing. There were all sorts of different coding styles. Practically every example in the book had something that really wasn't quite PEP 8 and needed to be fixed. We ended up actually removing the last few chapters because they covered things that were no longer applicable. I think there was something about Zope or something in it, which is fine. I started with Zope too, but that's no longer an important platform that you would put in a book pitched at that level. So we basically had to do quite a lot of work. It ended up being a pretty major rewrite. And I think, fortunately, I started from a good place, but then the things that I added and the stuff that I wrote, with the result, we got, I think, even better reviews for the second edition. And then as we started talking about it a couple of years ago, it's like, well, might be time for another refresh. So that one was somewhat easier in terms of the language, but we also decided that given the way tech books go these days, we needed to add more like little quick check exercises so that people could confirm they'd gotten whatever was in the previous little section. And we also added some longer lab exercises at the end of each chapter so people could have a little bit more practical experience with the things covered. Added a case study at the end. So that ended up actually being a fairly extensive thing too. I think the lesson there is if a publisher tells you, don't worry, this is going to be an easy job, don't believe them.
Basically, anytime somebody says it's going to be easy, that usually means that they're just trying to get you on the hook, and
right.
then and then you go
all
off
you
the deep
need to
end.
do is our famous last words. Yes.
And in at least the third edition, I don't know if it was present in the second edition, but the tail end of the book covers some introductory aspects of data analysis and data manipulation. So I'm wondering if that is an artifact of the sort of current climate of Python and programming in general, or if that's something that you incorporated in that second edition as sort of something that was starting to become important.
No, actually, in the second edition, the final chapters were more involved with kind of the beginnings of some web concepts for web programming. And when we got to the third edition, the climate had changed such that we felt it was really important that we address some of the of the foundations that you need to use Python for data analysis. We're not trying to be a data science book per se. That's many other books about that, but rather just now that you've been through the basics of Python, here's how you can kind of clean and normalize your data so that the data science can start. And that's kind of a reflection of the climate, and it's also sort of a reflection of the experience I've had over the years, since even from the beginning I've found that that's been one of the main things where Python has always saved me, is when you need to do that whole ETL pipeline and get data ready for some use. It's been invaluable.
Yeah, and even when you're using it for web development contexts, there's always data somewhere. There's always a need to be able to take in some source and be able to perform some manipulations on it and make it sane and usable somewhere else down the line, whether that's pulling from your database and sending it up to an API, or receiving input from an API post request and putting it to the database, or as you said, building out ETL pipelines or just systems management. It's something that's useful no matter what domain you're working with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And in the overall process of writing the book and updating it, particularly going from that 1.5 to 3.x, which is, as you said, a big leap. I mean, people are having issues going from 2 to 3. So,
right.
But I'm wondering what you found to be some of the most interesting aspects of the language or the standard library that you were exposed to just by virtue of having to dig deep into it, that you either didn't really know about or didn't appreciate fully until having to go through that process.
I think partly doing something like this, I think partly coming from the perspective that I had, which is I knew the Python community, and I knew that, I guess to my mind, the worst thing that could happen would be to have these people that I knew ask me about things and I wouldn't know because I hadn't studied them, if you know what I mean. So I really just kind of almost over every aspect of the language. I think a couple of things that maybe stand out are kind of digging through the collections library to understand the pieces there. I'm not sure it's an underappreciated library, but it certainly is quite a piece of work that people, I think, should be aware of as they come into Python, and the many things that it can do and the way that it does them Pythonically. And, a little bit in terms of the ins and outs and the many confusions of packaging and distributing Python, things like that. I'm not sure I actually now know the answers to that, but I do know how complex the problem is and several of the various attempts at solutions and things like that. So there are a lot of things that way. It really does, as you work through all of that. And at some points it seems endless, but it does actually give you a pretty wide understanding, I think.
And over the course of your career, I know that you've worked with a large variety of other languages and other language communities. So I'm wondering, what have been some of the most useful lessons that you have learned, both from those communities that you'd like to see brought back into the Python ecosystem, or from those language implementations that you'd like to see in the Python language, and then in the reverse, things that you would like to see taken from Python and brought into some of these other ecosystems and languages?
That strikes me as kind of a hard question, because I have known lots of people who have coded in other languages, and I've coded in a number of languages over the years, but I'm not sure, particularly back in the day when I was involved with those, that I ever really ran across anything like those communities. I think maybe the Linux community in the, up to 2010 or so would be about the last time I went to a Linux fest. But I think there were some interesting things about community. And otherwise, for the other languages, as I say, I never saw as much in the way of community. I mean, I guess I can recall being on C mailing lists back in the day, and the only thing that I seem to recall then are sort of people arguing a lot over how to format their code or things like that. Probably unfair. But, I guess I don't really see that historically a lot of other languages have spent nearly the effort on that. Maybe in the past 10 years they have more so, but I don't think I can really comment very well on that. So it's what all communities need to do in this day and age, is continue to think about what makes them inclusive, how they can bring people in and make them feel welcome and part of the community. And that can be across a wide number of axes. Gender is popularly mentioned, but there are all sorts of other ways too where people feel not included. And communities that don't deal with that, I think, do not have as strong a future as communities who do find a way to deal with that. So that's the thing, I think. And I think the Python community has certainly tried hard to work on that. We have not always been successful, but we continue to try. And I think that is one of our strengths.
And so beyond your work with the PSF and on the Quick Python book and your day-to-day work of leading a technical team, what are some of the other projects that you have been involved with that you're most proud of, either technical or otherwise?
Well, so I think it was in 2006, 2007. I actually organized a bunch of educators we created a number of improvements and patches for the turtle library. So we actually had all of our patches in Python 2.5's turtle library, I think it was. Sadly, well, not sadly, it was actually an improvement. In the next version of Python, they used Gregor Lingel's Xturtle library, which did many more things much more nicely, and that's the current turtle library. But it was actually my first kind of contribution to the language, and of course, it involved bringing together a number of different ideas and getting them in and ready to go. So I was very proud of that at the time. I've done a number of things with adding events to PyCon. So most recently, I am involved with the Hatchery program, which is a way that you can start new events at PyCon. And the first event, the one that really was my motivation for working with people to get this mechanism started, was the PyCon Charlas, the Spanish language track. So I have been very, very happy to see. Last year, we had the first track of talks ever at PyCon US in Spanish, and people were very excited about that. It's always very gratifying to be able to give people a voice that they didn't have before. So that will continue again this year, and I'm very excited to see that happen.
And looking forward, what are some of the other projects or trends in the Python community and ecosystem or in technology as a whole that you are most excited about, either just witnessing or participating in the near to medium future?
That's an interesting question. I think the one thing that I am most interested in watching develop, technically, certainly in Python, is what sort of answers we come up with for basically the problem of the GIL and getting multi-threaded performance improved so that we don't have the problems with threading that we have right now. That is a really tough technical problem. I am not counting on having an explanation or an answer for that, but it's a problem I've followed for some time, and I think that would be a very interesting development, because I think the pressure for coming up with an answer for that continues to grow. So I have confidence that our community will find an answer, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what trick we use to get around that.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the ones that comes up most often when I'm talking to somebody who is not directly involved in Python, but is sort of viewing it as a bystander and possibly working in a different language environment, whether it's compiled or something that natively supports multiprocess or multi-threading of, that's the language with the GIL, right? Why would you want to use that?
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, it's not that bad, but it is an issue, and it's having followed the discussions and some of the problems. It's a tough one, but I still think somebody will crack it, and I'm really interested to see what course that will take.
And are there any other aspects of the PSF or the Quick Python book or your overall career and involvement with the Python language and community that you'd like to discuss further before we close out the show?
I think I'll throw in one last thing, which is that a few weeks ago, I gave my first Python talk in Spanish. And so this has actually been, whatever you want to include of this is fine. But this has actually been something that I've been spending a lot of time on, is the human language side of things. And I found that very interesting, in that giving a talk in another language is really hard. And yet all of those of us who speak English expect everybody else to do it all the time without understanding that. So I'm really interested in the development of the international communities using Python, and how we can help them both in English, maybe by improving our documentation and things like that, and also support them as they develop communities using their native languages, whether that's Chinese or Spanish or Portuguese or anything else, Hindi. So that's been kind of an interest of mine for the past couple of years now.
Yeah, it's always interesting seeing the sort of prevalence or dominance of English in technical communities, because of the fact that a lot of early computer systems were only able to represent Latin characters, and just the lasting legacy that has provided, and some of the ways that that's actually starting to evolve into languages that support Unicode natively, that allow people to define new language systems that are more native to their spoken tongue. And also things like natural language processing, which historically has been very English-centric because of the corpora that are available to it, and some of the ways that new techniques are evolving to make it easier to provide different textual analysis runtimes for being able to interpret these different natural languages and be able to evaluate and incorporate new cultures and new languages as a result.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be done there.
All right. Well, for anybody who wants to get in touch with you or follow along with the work that you're doing, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. Also, for anybody who's interested, I believe that I'll be having a giveaway for a couple copies of your book from Manning, and there'll be a discount code as well. So I'll put that all in the show notes for details of anybody who's interested.
Bravo.
And with that, I'll move us into the picks. And this week, I'm going to choose the program Inkscape. It's a SVG editor. It's open source, easily installed on Linux, but it's also multi-platform, and I've been using it for doing all the design work that I do for the podcasts. So it's pretty easy to get up and running with, been very useful for my own purposes. And so for anybody who's interested in working with scalable vector graphics, definitely recommend that. And so with that, I'll pass it to you, Naomi. Do you have any picks this week?
Yes. Well, I mean, my pick is what I've found one of the more entertainment things this year, which is on Netflix, a series La Casa de las Flores, or House of Flowers. It's a send-up of Mexican telenovelas, which are kind of like soap operas, only more so. So as those things tend to be, this is just great fun. The more ridiculous and over the top it is, the more serious they play it, which is exactly what you need to do in a send-up. So and it comes with, an English version and a subtitle version and a Spanish version. So it's pretty accessible, but I found that to be very entertaining.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to share your experiences working with Python and its community, and the efforts that you've gone through to help provide educational materials to us. So thank you for that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay. Well, thank you. You too.